ADR. Promoting dialogue.
It's 6 p.m. in Dakar and Banjul, 7 p.m. in Lagos, Nigeria. Good evening and welcome to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM, online at wadr.org, and on YouTube and Facebook at WADR English. Here are the top stories. In the Gambia, Kanifing Mayor Bensouda emerges as presidential flag bearer for an opposition coalition ahead of December polls.
The campaign begins now. The work begins now. The responsibility begins now.
Ghanaian government rejects accusations by opposition New Patriotic Party during Thursday's nationwide protest.
We need to segregate those expressing concerns into two groups. There are people genuinely concerned that it may have an impact on the freedom of speech.
In other news, Benin reaffirms commitment to normalizing relations with Niger, and Mali says it repelled an attack on an army camp in San as JNIM claims responsibility. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Abdullahi Hassan.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast. Newslink kicks off in the Gambia, where the new opposition alliance known as Coalition 2026 has nominated its presidential flag bearer ahead of December 2026 polls. In a vote comprising several political parties, Talib Ahmed Bensouda emerged as the flag bearer, setting the stage for a showdown with the incumbent Adama Barrow. Bensouda's emergence follows months of negotiations among coalition members seeking to unite behind a single candidate to challenge Barrow, who has neither publicly announced or rejected alleged threatened bid. However, a new internal battle is taking place within the coalition marked by withdrawals and disagreements over the future of the alliance. From Banjul, Ruth Samara Cates reports.
The 2026 coalition, which gained popularity in June, is part of an attempt to unite political parties behind a single presidential candidate ahead of the December polls. However, the emergence of the 40-year-old mayor of Kanifing municipality as a flag bearer, it's now putting that unity to the test, with some of the parties questioning aspects of the coalition building process. Talib Bensouda explains his selection and his plans for the 2026 election.
The campaign begins now. The work begins now, the responsibility begins now, and together, with faith in Allah and confidence in the Gambian people, we will take the message to every corner of our nation.
Bensouda's selection process has already sparked reactions within the coalition, resulting in withdrawals, including that of the APP Sobeya leader Esambai Fall. Fall's concern is about the future of the coalition.
We have, however, concluded that the foreign flag bearer selection process can no longer provide the fairness necessary and credibility required of a process of this importance.
The development over the weekend leaves the question of whether Coalition 2026 can maintain unity and present a strong alternative to President Adama Barrow, a situation Usman Barrow, a political analyst, analyzes.
The coalition formation is actually a good idea because now it's going to give the Gambia a chance for them to have actually limited political parties to go to election. So when they go to election, Gambians can now be able to narrow down their final choice based on the few.
Young Gambians who yearn for change and constitute 57% of the registered voters are not left out of the discussion.
I think he can unite the opposition because he has youth energy and UDP structure.
I believe that he can because they all need each other in order to fight against the NPP. That is their target now, the NPP.
Talib Bensouda can give Coalition 2026 a strong chance, but the biggest factor will be whether he can keep the opposition united.
With the election approaching, Coalition 2026 faces the challenge of turning its agreement on paper into genuine political unity on the ground. For WADR, Rose Samara Cates, Banjul.
Elsewhere, the Ghanaian government has rejected claims that freedom of expression is under attack in the country, insisting recent arrests of social media users were based on alleged threats and offensive conduct rather than criticism of the government. Accra's position on Monday is against the backdrop of the nationwide protest led by the opposition New Patriotic Party last Thursday. Presenting the government statement, Minister of Communications Felix Kwakwe Ofosu says the Mahama-led administration remains committed to protecting free speech and other democratic rights. From Accra, Eklim Awuku reports.
The government's response comes after the opposition New Patriotic Party's Democracy Under Attack demonstration in Accra, where the party accused the government of shrinking the civic space and undermining democratic freedoms. Mr. Kwache Ofosu says the government draws a clear distinction between legitimate criticism and statements that allegedly threaten the safety of public officials.
We need to segregate those expressing concerns into two groups. There are people genuinely concerned that it may have an impact on the freedom of speech. And then there are MPP propagandists. It is not our position, neither is it that of the president, to clamp down on free speech. You are free to criticize government, even harshly.
He argues that citizens remain free to criticize the president and government policies, but such freedom does not extend to threats, defamatory allegations, or conduct that may constitute an offense.
When you go on TikTok, a social media platform, and threaten to kill the president, behead him, put him in a sack, and behead his wife, that is not free speech. That is a threat on the life of an individual. You forget about the fact that he is president. It is an offense. The security forces, to the extent that they have evidence, will pursue the person. That is what has happened.
At least 6 social media users, mostly TikTokers, have in recent months been arrested or jailed over posts targeting President John Dramani Mahama and First Lady Lodina Mahama. Mr. Kwache Ofosu maintains the government will continue to uphold freedom of expression while ensuring that laws governing threats, defamation, and other criminal conduct are enforced.
The MPP's loudest communicators who engage in such criticism, no matter how unfounded it is, don't get arrested. Some too say things that the police believe will undermine the peace.
The government's position comes amid renewed debate over the balance between free expression online and abuse of social media platforms. For WADL, Elikli Mauku, Accra.
In Côte d'Ivoire, former President Laurent Gbagbo is restructuring the leadership of his political party, the PPACI. Gbagbo announced on Monday that he is delegating some of his responsibilities to 5 senior party officials, including Asu Ado, Hube Wulai, and Justin Katinan-Kone. The former president says the move is aimed at making the party more efficient and promoting a more collective style of leadership. Gbagbo adds that strength of the PPACI lies in teamwork, unity, and clearly shared responsibilities. The restructuring comes as the opposition party prepares for its next political challenges and seeks to strengthen its organization ahead of upcoming political battles.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Remember, we're streaming live on WADR.org and on YouTube and Facebook at WADR English. In Benin, the opposition Democrats Party is challenging the creation of the new Senate and the election of former President Patrice Talon as its president. The Senate was officially installed in Port Novo last week following a constitutional reform that created the new upper chamber. The opposition Democrats opposed the reform and voted against creating the Senate, but the measure was approved after the opposition failed to secure enough votes to block its establishment. Christopher Ticho has more.
The Democratic Party says the Senate was established against the opposition's wishes. However, it maintains that the new institution must now prove its usefulness by helping restore political pluralism in Benin. Former parliamentarian and party official Habibu Wurokubu argues that the country's political institutions are dominated by a single political faction, leaving little room for alternative voices. Last Thursday, the new Senate Bureau constituted its first leadership, which consists of Patrice Talon as president, former National Assembly President Louis Vlavonu as vice president, Alassane Seydu rapporteur, and Adijatu Mates as deputy rapporteur. They were appointed for a renewable 5-year term. But the Democrats are therefore calling for an independent and objective Senate that can represent different political viewpoints and help address the country's political challenges. The opposition says the legitimacy of the new upper house will ultimately depend on its ability to uphold political diversity and carry out its constitutional responsibilities impartially.
Christopher Tucho, that report filed in by our Cotonou correspondent Aziz Adam Swile. Still in Benin, the government has reaffirmed its commitment to fully normalizing relations with neighboring Niger, saying it has done everything within its power to ease tensions between the two countries. The statement comes days after Nigerian President General Abdurrahman Chani confirmed that discussions with Cotonou were continuing and stressed the need for lasting guarantees to ensure future political crises do not disrupt cross-border movement. Benin government spokesperson Wilfred Landry Hungeji explains.
Le dossier Bénin-Niger, nous en sommes où nous en sommes.
On the issue of Benin and Niger, we are where we are. What do I mean by that? We remain hopeful that relations will return to normal and that the people on both sides of the border will continue to enjoy the cohesion and peaceful coexistence that has always existed. At the political level, dialogue between the leaders is taking place. As you saw, one of the heads of state's very first trips after taking office also toured the sub-region and visit neighboring countries. We may have had disagreements in the past, and perhaps there's still some lingering tensions here and there, but we have made every effort. We reopened the border as soon as the sanctions that had led to its closure were lifted, and we continue to do everything we objectively can to convince our brothers in Niger that we are their neighbors, we are their brothers, and that even if we have had disagreements, we are destined to live together. For that reason, it is in everyone's interest to work towards peaceful coexistence. As far as Benin is concerned, I do not see what is preventing progress. We have done everything we objectively could.
Beninese government spokesperson Wilfred Landry Hungeji speaking there. Continuing on diplomacy and regional cooperation, Senegal has officially begun its mediation mission in Guinea-Bissau to help the country return to constitutional order. Last week, Senegalese Minister of African Integration and Foreign Affairs Cheikh Niane and Minister of the Armed Forces Yankuba Jammeh traveled to Bissau and presented the mandate of the country's transition authorities. Veronique Njai tells us more.
During the mission, the Senegalese delegation met with Guinea-Bissau's Foreign Affairs Minister Fatoumata Diop, Prime Minister Idio Vurerate, and the President of the Transition, General Hotan Tam. Discussions focused on the mediation process and its next steps toward a constitutional order in Bissau. Senegal reaffirmed ECOWAS' readiness to support Guinea-Bissau in achieving a swift return to constitutional rule. In response, the transitional authorities welcomed Senegal's initiative and expressed their willingness to work with Dakar as the mediation process gets underway. The mission marks the formal start of Senegal's efforts on behalf of ECOWAS to promote dialogue and help resolve the political crisis in Guinea-Bissau. As a reminder, Guinea-Bissau's transitional authorities have officially set presidential and legislative elections for December 6, 2026, the date roadmap implemented after the November 2025 military takeover.
Veronique Njai reporting. Now looking at security, no fewer than 10 Malian soldiers reportedly lost their lives during a Sunday attack on a military camp in San, in the central Senegal region. The assault was claimed by the Group for the Support of Islam and Muslims, otherwise known as JNIM, an Al-Qaeda-linked militant group. The Malian army, however, says it successfully repelled the attack and that the situation is now under control. Augustine Kole brings us more details.
The attack was carried out at around 5:30 a.m. by JNIM fighters who targeted a Malian armed forces position in the town of San, located in the Senegal region. In a video released after the assault, the terrorist group claims to have taken control of the military barracks. JNIM also claims to have inflicted heavy losses on the farmer. Images circulated on social media reportedly showed fighters inside what is presented as the military compound that came under attack. For its part, the Malian General Staff describes the incident as an attempted attack. In a statement, the military command says troops stationed at the base launched a counter-offensive against the attackers and successfully repelled the fighters. The General Staff adds that the situation is now under control following the clashes. However, it has not released an official casualty figure for the farmer, even though sources suggest that 11 soldiers lost their lives during the heavy gunfight. The Malian authorities have also provided no details on possible casualties among the attackers. The weekend attack took place in central Mali, an area regularly targeted by armed groups. San is also an important strategic point along the route linking several towns in central and southern Mali.
Augustine Kolio, that report filed in by WADR's Bamako correspondent Aliyu Cham. Just before the break, let's bring you one more security-related story, but this time in Nigeria, where the army says it has neutralized 9 suspected terrorists during an airstrike in Dumba, Borno State, northeast of the country. The air component of Operation Hadinkai also destroyed 3 cars believed to be carrying weapons and logistics. The strike was carried out on Saturday following intelligence on terrorist movements around the region. WADR's Usman Umar in Abuja completes the story.
The military says the aircraft was conducting an armed reconnaissance and air interdiction mission when it arrived over Dumba at about 2:58 in the afternoon. The crew first spotted 3 suspected terrorists walking along a road. A second group of 6 was also seen pushing 3 carts believed to be carrying weapons and other logistics. According to the army, the aircraft maintained surveillance rather than engaging immediately, tracking the groups until they converged at a location inside the bush. A precision strike was then carried out. The military says all 9 suspected terrorists were neutralized. Subsequently, the aircraft returned to the area where the 3 carts had been sighted and conducted another strike. Battle damage assessments showed that all 3 carts were destroyed and engulfed in flames. The military operation highlights the growing role of intelligence-led aerial surveillance in tracking mobile terrorist groups and disrupting their movement of weapons and supplies. The latest strike comes as Operation Hadinkai continues coordinated air and ground operations to disrupt terrorist movements, logistics networks, and freedom of action across Nigeria's northeast. Military sources say the situation around Dumba remains calm but unpredictable as troops maintain operational readiness. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
You are listening to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM, online at wadr.org, and on YouTube and Facebook at WADR English. Here's a reminder of our top stories. In the Gambia, Kanifing Mayor Bensouda emerges as presidential flag bearer for an opposition coalition ahead of December polls. Ghanaian government rejects accusations by opposition New Patriotic Party during Thursday's nationwide protest. Benin reaffirms commitment to normalizing relations with neighboring Niger. And Mali says it repelled an attack on an army camp in San as Jenim claims responsibility. Still ahead in the news, we have the guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
Bringing you the facts beyond the headlines from Monrovia, Liberia. This is Abraham Parker. Stay tuned to WADR 94.9 FM Dakar.
Many thanks for staying with us. Let's now take you to Liberia because heavy rains, rough seas and worsening weather conditions are threatening the livelihoods of fishing communities. In West Point, near the capital Monrovia, dangerous sea conditions have destroyed fishing nets, leaving fishermen with thousands of dollars in losses and making it increasingly difficult to feed their families. With their livelihoods under growing threat, fishermen and fishmongers are calling on the government to urgently intervene and address the worsening conditions along the coast. From Monrovia, Abraham Parker reports.
West Point community has a long history as a fishing community, and it remains one of Monrovia's important coastal areas for fishing, fish landing, and fish trading. However, the challenges confronting the sector are becoming increasingly difficult, particularly during the rainy season. Additionally, the destruction of fishing nets at the sea by larger fishing vessels forces fishermen and the fishmongers to stop fishing for months.
My vessel went fishing and ship run through my net. All of my net go. The net are loose. Almost 12,000 United States dollars. And friends, they have no regrets. When they see rough, sometimes cancer in the bad mouth, and the human being life can be involved.
After paying our taxes, they book our net. No one seen.
The difficulties are also affecting women who depend on fishing for their livelihoods. A fishmonger, Shalom Wadr in West Point, says heavy rains sometimes reduce the availability of fish from local fishermen. Meanwhile, the Environmental Justice Foundation Program Officer, Augustine Fayard, expresses concern about the poor sanitation conditions in the West Point community.
Sometimes it becomes difficult to see whether you really want to eat that fish. The activities are happening in the water. Most of the fish being landed here, they come from the sea.
As the rainy season continues, fishermen and the fishmongers in West Point are calling for greater protection of their livelihoods, safer conditions at sea, effective redress when fishing gear is damaged, and urgent action to improve sanitation in the community. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
Politics,
analyses on major news,
social matters, and all. This is The Guest.
Now, regional civil society leaders are raising fresh concerns over the shrinking civic space across West Africa, warning that restrictions on fundamental freedoms are no longer limited to countries under military rule. They say citizens' rights to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly are coming under increasing pressure across the sub-region, with the latest assessment showing that civic freedoms continue to deteriorate. Our guest, Omolara Balogun, Head of Policy Influencing and Advocacy at the West Africa Civil Society Institute, WACSI, shares her assessment of the situation. She was speaking on WADR's Citizens Hour.
When we look across the region, we currently have 3 of the countries in former ECOWAS under military regimes, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And we understand that where this kind of regime exists, citizens' rights, freedom of expression, association, and assembly is usually the first target. And outside these 3 countries, even when we look across the coastal states, we can also see manifestations of shrinking civic space and a kind of a threat to the work that civil society does and their ability to operate as freely as it's expected under international law and even under local laws. The recent report from Civicus, all the countries in West Africa now have been rated narrowed, obstructed, or restricted. And what this means is that the situation is not getting better.
How important is it, for not just political actors, but citizens in determining whether a political transition ultimately succeeds or fails?
I think it's rather unfortunate. Democracy, it's an ideology, and it has its principles. And those principles are very central to its practices and how it operates. Where you do not have freedom to express yourselves, which is one of the fundamental bedrock of a functional democracy. Democracy creates rooms for debate, for ideation, for disagreement, negotiations, discussions. These are very important. And it is also a kind of government that gives rooms and spaces for everybody to participate. So regardless of who you are or what your trajectory had been, if the government you run does not weave those principles together, that's not democracy.
Omolara, I'll just bring in the case of the Gambia. Yes, the coup happened in 1994, but Jammeh was in power. Elections were held, but the Gambia is still described as a country that suffered 22 years of dictatorship. So basically what you're saying is elections are not just the determinant of whether democracy is or the civic space is open.
Absolutely. It is not. Election is important because it gives the opportunity for the citizens to elect their leaders to contribute to that process of electing leaders for next 4, 5 or whatever years, it makes it participatory. But what is much more important is how governance is done between one election to another. And this is exactly where the tenets of democracy must manifest itself in real sense. From one election to the other, governance must be participatory. It must create an enabling environment for citizens to move freely, to speak, to ask questions. In fact, asking questions is one important element of a functional democracy. And if the opportunity for oppositions, for citizens to ask questions, not necessarily even demanding accountability, but even ask the whys, the hows, the when, the wheres becomes a problem, then that is not democracy. So we need to move beyond using electoral processes or elections as a yardstick for defining everything that democracy means.
Visit wadr.org or our YouTube page to listen to the full conversation with Omolara Balogun, Head of Policy Influencing and Advocacy at the West Africa Civil Society Institute, WACSI. In the sporting world, Morocco's Atlas Lionesses have reached the semi-finals of the 2026 Women's Africa Cup of Nations after beating South Africa 2-1 in Rabat on Saturday. Sakina Wadr opened the scoring before Hanani Ait El Haj doubled Morocco's lead from the penalty spot. Tembi Katlana pulled one back for South Africa, but Morocco held on for victory. The win also secures Morocco's place at the 2027 Women's World Cup in Brazil. The Atlas Lionesses will face either Cameroon or Nigeria in the semi-finals. Meanwhile, Algeria has also secured a place in the semi-finals of the 2026 Women's Africa Cup of Nations, beating Côte d'Ivoire 2-1 in Casablanca. The victory sent Algeria into the semi-finals and secures their qualification for the 2027 Women's World Cup in Brazil. And finally, Malawi have reached the Women's AFCON semi-finals for the first time and qualified for the 2027 FIFA Women's World Cup after beating Ghana 2-1 on Sunday. Rose Katsere scored the decisive second-half winner, completing a remarkable run for the tournament debutants who had already defeated defending champions Nigeria and Egypt in the group stage. Ghana hopes of a return to the World Cup remain alive. The Black Queens will face Côte d'Ivoire in an African playoff, with the winner moving on to the Intercontinental playoffs. And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Maodo Diouf for the technical support. Do interact with us via social media platforms, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at WADR English. Stream live at wadr.org and listen to us anywhere, anytime by simply downloading our mobile application, WADR Live. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is a repeat broadcast of WADR's public opinion poll, this time on the implementation of the eco-currency come 2027. I'm Abdullahi Hassan. Good evening.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverside County. A big thank you to Radio Graft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to Newslink.